Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the discussion of medication administration systems and the Plan, Do, Study, Act model for change. Thank you. Thank you. Good morning, Lori. So I'm glad everyone can hear me okay. So I want to get going. I think we only have about half the class right now, but we will continue. So please take a moment to mute your microphones to decrease distraction, as well as refraining from the comment bar. We've discussed about that. It can just be a little bit distraction. And also, we only have an hour, less than an hour, because I want to give you about 5 minutes break prior to your next lecture. I know that you had been introduced to the chapter on quality improvement last semester, so the concept should be familiar to you. I have laid the information out in the PowerPoint for you and will support the slides in our discussions. I have reserved the latter part of the class to discuss with you a case that is happening right now that directly relates to you as future nurses. It relates to quality improvement, of course, and the goals and improving patient safety. So it's really important. I really want to spend at least half the class on that discussion. So I will be reviewing these slides efficiently but quickly, and you can certainly read them, and I will add supporting thoughts on them. So please pay attention as well, okay? All right, so quality improvement. So basically, this is the framework used to systematically improve the way care is delivered to the patients, okay? The Institute of Medicine released a report 22 years ago, hopefully that you are familiar with it or have heard of it, to err as human. And at that time when it came out, it basically stated that there was approximately 98,000 deaths a year due to medical error. So we were killing almost 100,000 people that came to the hospital, and we were supposed to help them. And many of these people came in with minor things and they died. So that's not good. So you can imagine that caused a huge, all over the news. It was a very big deal. And basically what came out of this report was that we need to prioritize patient safety. Since then, there became a significant increase in patient safety research that continues today. Many organizations have come out from this. The hospitals and the hospital policies are all around patient safety. And of course, our evidence-based research that we constantly talk about, anywhere from passing a medication, the 5 rights, to performing a straight cath, or placing a Foley, or changing a central line dressing. All of these came out of patient safety requirements and policies to prevent errors, right? So it was a very big deal. So some of the other things that came out of this, of course, was the growth and advent of technology. And as our technology has grown, we've used these to implement interventions to help support patient safety. And some of those, and you guys are familiar with these, and we're going to be reviewing these today. You guys probably have used them, but these safety measures, this technology that we use, are again a guardrail to patient safety. So you have barcoding patients' ID bands and medications, electronic medication administration records, the automated medication dispensing machines, otherwise known as the Pyxis, which hopefully you guys have all had an opportunity to withdraw meds, the computerized physician ordering system, the CPOE. So instead of those handwritten documents that, of course, were causing a lot of errors because people were misreading them, now it's electronic, right? So it's better reading, better safety measures. And of course, the electronic health record that, we actually all utilize as well. One second, sorry, next slide moved over. Okay, so blame-free environment. So according to the IOM report that came out to Err as Human, most errors are often a result of the healthcare system and not the faults of any single individual. Okay, so hence to Err as Human. So basically coming out and saying, as humans, we are going to err. So it is the responsibility of the systems that we are placed in that it's their responsibility to help keep the patient safe. We are going to make mistakes, but guardrails need to be in place to make sure that that's prevented as much as possible. Okay, and so basically from that they created this blame-free environment. So at the time when they were doing the investigating and they were asking, okay, why are these errors taking place? the results were coming back was that people were not reporting any errors. So if they made a medication error, or they made an error in surgery, or wherever they might have made the error, people were not owning up to it or saying anything, because they fear they were going to be punished, or they were going to be fired, or there was going to be retribution. So this, so to err as human came out, and there's this distinguishing between the blame-free environment and the just culture. Okay. So the blame-free environment basically says you should be able to come forward, and not only should you, but you have to come forward and let us know that an error was made, and we will. Okay, can you just pause the questions while I'm talking? Thank you. So the blame free and just culture environment basically means that they want you to come forward, and that once you come forward and state, let's say I made a medication error, then we come together and they ask me how it was made, what happened, and they identify what barriers or problems might have caused this. And then I do re-education, and then maybe there's a whole system-wide change in how they actually go forward with this. And this has been very beneficial. And out of this, many changes and policies have changed to support, all because people are coming forward and said, I made this error because this is how it's written in the Pyxis, or I made this error because I changed the central line by myself. So when people come forward and admit to their mistakes, they meet, change is made, system-wide changes are made, and then we go forward and patient safety is improved, and it has improved. Okay, so just culture tries to balance the blame-free environment with the appropriate accountability. So I want you to lock onto this screen, because this is very important. I put it here for a reason, because I feel like you really need to know what this means, right? So basically, we're going to focus on correcting the problem that leads to the engaging and unsafe behavior, establishing zero tolerance policy for reckless behavior, because it doesn't mean that whatever happens anytime you make an error, it's not a big deal. It's a very big deal. So you want to differentiate between human error, at-risk behavior, or reckless behavior. And there definitely is a difference. So based on understanding that errors often result from system failures. So again, to err as human, and I want to reiterate this, and it's going to come up again. In the err as human, it's basically saying that people are going to make mistakes, but oftentimes those mistakes are made because of system failures. Okay. Recognize that the atmosphere of punishment impedes error prevention. So again, basically, if you're punishing somebody, it's going to impede the next time. You're not going to be able to prevent it the next time, because people are not going to come forward. And again, focusing on system while maintaining individual accountability. And it requires buy-in from, of course, the whole team. I'm just going to pause to take a sip of water. Be right with you. All right. Okay. So the Plan, Do, Study, Act, basically, I'm just going to, hold on, I just want to make sure I didn't skip a slide. Okay. So we're going to circle back on some of those things, but I just want to kind of pause here, because we're talking about implementing change, right? So things happen, we implement and change. So the PDSA basically is a method to test a change that is implemented. So something happens, we implement a change, and this is the way the change is tested and implemented. So it breaks it down, the task, into steps, and then they evaluate the outcome, they approve upon it, and they test it again. So what I want you to know from these slides, and I know that you read the example I gave you, and I'm going to give you another example, but I want you to know in each of these slides, for example, I think it's important that you know what takes place in all four of these. So you have a plan. So your objective, your predictions, the do, the carry out the plan, the recording the data, the studying, and then the act. And then basically you get to the end, and whatever outcomes you came, you kind of go back again and you start it again. And that's going to make a little bit more sense going forward. So in the plan section, I gave you a plan, do, act, study example. So I'm hoping that you read it and you kind of have an understanding. I want to point out here that there's a bit of a template that goes with it. So if you see that bold stuff where it says, I plan to, I hope this produces, steps to execute, whatever your goal is, whatever your plan is, you're going to have this template and you're just going to kind of fill this in. If we were in class and we had more time, I would kind of have you come up with your own to see if you can kind of go through these steps. Okay. But again, the thing that you want to remember is that this is done to implement change. So I'm going to give you an example of this plan, do, study, act that we did on our unit, Verdi 4 West. You do not have to write this down. You do not have to memorize it. Again, the most important thing for me is that you understand it's an implement for change and that you are aware of what steps are in each of the sections, okay? So I'm going to go through them. So plan. So on Verdi 4 West, we asked the nurses to provide education on at least one medication for each patient. So basically telling them, what the medication's for and what the signs and symptoms are. I hope this produces nurses that provide patient education on medications and that the nurses will continue to practice. That's what I hope it produces. My steps to execute this was that we will ask 5 nurses to participate. After completion, we will ask them, was it useful? Did you find it time consuming to do this? And would they do that again? So that was going to be the plan part of this. Okay, so the do. What did you observe? So what we observed was that nurses did find it useful and informative, and it added to patient safety and care. And the nurses actually also found that it improved on their own practice. So they found it helpful for their own practice. On the study portion of that, what did you learn and did you meet your measurement goal? What we found was that 4 out of the 5 nurses, in fact, did perform the patient medication education. Okay. And then under the ACT section, what did you conclude from this cycle? 4 out of 5 said that they were comfortable with it and would continue using it. And the person that did not do it, we basically asked them if there was any barriers to do it, and re-educated on them, and provided more education on how to do it. So that is just another example of how that PDSA cycle would be used, and that we utilized it on our unit. Now, that circle that you saw, how it kind of comes back around, now that we've kind of hit all those sections, we would go back around again and start it again. So the plan, for example, might be, I'm going to see if the nurses that participated 3 weeks ago are still continuing the medication education on signs and symptoms. And that's going to be the plan. And then, of course, I'm going to go through the whole thing. And if they say yes, great. If they say no, then the questions are going to be why was that not the case? All right. So I just wanted to, I know you can read the slides. I know you could read what the PDSA Act is. I gave you an example on there that you could read. And I just wanted to reiterate it again. So I'm hoping that just kind of like cements what that is for you. And again, I just want to make sure that you understand as you're reviewing it, that you know exactly what the goals are in each of those 4 boxes. Okay. All right. So now we're going to step back and we're going to talk about those interventions that have been put in place to err as human, all those safety guardrails that we put in place to keep our patients safe. And none of them is bigger than this one. And you guys get it all the time and you practice it and we talk about it. It's the first thing you're taught when you come to nursing school. There is a reason for that. Okay. And I've read studies that show that if you are in a facility and let's say that's a particular floor and they all do this, the rate of error is like 98%. Like this works. Okay. So the right person, the right medication, the right dose, the right time, the right route, and the right documentation. And this is going to come back into play a little bit later in our conversation. But just remember the 6 rights and 3 checks are there for a reason. Okay, we don't become complacent in our practice, after you graduate a year later. This is something that is put in place because when it's not put in place, people die. Okay, so this is extremely important. Okay, so I'm going to go over a couple of the technologies that we had talked about that I mentioned earlier. Sorry, I need more water. And I know that you guys are familiar with them and have used them, hopefully some of you. All right. So barcode medication administration technology. Okay, that's that scan bar. It ensures the patients receive the right medication and the right dose when needed. It provides a valuable double check on the clinical reasoning of pharmacies and nurses, and it adds efficiency to eliminating manual recording. So that's when you scan the patient's bracelet and then you scan the medication. And I have scanned, even last night, I have scanned, or the night before, I have scanned the patient's bracelet and realized that I have the wrong patient up. You know, that happens more often than not. Maybe I quickly, before I go in the room, have to look at some other patient. So I quickly scan that patient's bracelet. It gives me a warning that basically says this is not the right patient when I click on the medication. So if I click the patient's band and then I go to click the medication, it'll say this isn't a match, which is excellent. So that brings me to the medication administration. So I've got the scan card. Now I've got the medication, the MAR, and these are linked, right? So I'm by the bedside. I have the MAR in front of me. I have the scan. I'm scanning the bracelet. I'm scanning the medication. If it's the wrong medication, it'll pop up and say, this medication is not due at this time. Do you want to continue? So not only does it tell me it's not the medication is not at the right time, it asks me if I want to continue giving it. And there are times where I do want to continue giving it. So I had a patient the other day whose blood pressure was like 194 over, I don't remember what it was, I think 82. He had a 9 o'clock metoprolol. I confirmed with the doctor, I'm going to give it earlier. So when I scanned that bracelet and it said, this medication is not due at this time, do you want to give it? I have to click yes. I have to click override. And then once I click override, it still doesn't allow me to give it. I still have to choose why I'm overriding it, okay? Those safety measures are in there for the safety of the patient. And that's basically the MAR that we're just talking about. So it also has access to the most recent drug information, the labs. So for example, if you were about to give a Lovenox, which you know is an anticoagulant, but you have this electronic MAR record with you, and you can see that the patient's, for example, H&H has been downtrending, and maybe it's like 7. The H&H is 7/20. So you notice that, you know what, I don't know why, but this guy must be bleeding because his H&H has been dropping, and you have this medication, you have all this information in one place. Then you reach out to the doctor and say, you know, I've noticed that this, you know, his H&H is dropping. Do you want me to hold this Lovenox? So it's an all-inclusive system that really has added to the safety of the patient. In addition to this, okay, it basically automatically verifies those 5 rights. So those 3 checks. So you're scanning the barcode, it's the right patient. Then you're scanning the drug and it's the right drug. It'll tell you on the MAR what the dose is. And if you don't, for example, let's say I'm giving, let's just say Tylenol. And let's say I'm supposed to give 650 milligrams of Tylenol, but instead I scanned the drug 3 times because I pulled 3 Tylenol. Okay, it will error. It'll come up and it will not let you go forward until you correct. And again, this has saved me many times. It just happens. Sometimes you don't pull enough of the right drug. So I'm giving a drug to somebody that, you know, maybe it's Keppra, maybe it's an anti-seizure drug, and I'm supposed to pull 2 tablets, but I only pill 1. And then when I scan it, it says it's insufficient. Okay, so it's an excellent tool, and it's again provides patient safety. And then of course the 6th right is documentation. So it provides the 6th right for you because you're appropriately documenting proper documentation. Okay, the dispensing machines, which is the Pyxis. So the doctor places the orders, the medication orders go to the pharmacy. So the doctor doesn't place the orders because the doctors are human, right? So they make errors. So the doctor places the order and then it goes to the pharmacist, and then the pharmacist looks at the medication that the doctor has ordered, and then the pharmacist verifies it as well. And then it goes to the nurse, and then the nurse acknowledges the order. Okay, so again, all these safety guardrails that are in place for the patient. It simplifies the process, it makes it more efficient, and of course, again, it helps prevent medication or errors, and it also tracks the use of the narcotics and controlled substances. Medication reconciliation, huge. Okay, a lot of errors are made with reconciliation. Patients often come in with polypharmacy. So you have like this electronic documentation that once the medications are put in, you can see if there is a double of medication, if there's any extra end medication. Let's say the patient's on a lot of heart medication. Do they need to be on that many blood pressure medicines, or can we reduce some of the blood pressure medications? Okay, so Again, 40% of these errors are attributed to lack of poor medication reconciliation. So again, this electronic, the MAR, the electronic medication record, all of that stuff has kind of consolidated everything so that we can take a look and see in a glance what the patient's taking. So one doctor doesn't order one thing, and then they go to another doctor, and then another doctor orders it without them knowing. And a lot of errors happen because of that. So technology is our friend if we use it correctly. But again, errors can be made there as well. That's what we were just talking about, the electronic healthcare record. You guys belong to my chart. Many of you, okay, this is a big deal. The doctors also put all their orders in there, and they've got system sets that help them as well. So for example, if they want to put bladder scan orders in for a patient for a straight cath, it'll actually automatically populate based on the latest evidence-based research. So this has really helped providers as well, making sure that they are putting the proper orders in for the patient. Okay. Another big thing of the electronic health record, again, I kind of already mentioned, is that if it's all consolidated into one base, we all have the same information. We can see lab results, we can see chest x-rays. About that again in a minute. So computer private order entry. So this is probably the biggest deal. So I'm sure you've read about when you guys were doing medication administration that a lot of errors used to be made because of the handwriting of for example, the providers not being legible, and orders not being understood, or the wrong medication being, not being able to be read correctly. So this basically has eliminated this, because obviously the doctor, the provider puts the order in, and it's much more legible. It improves patient safety, medication, the quality of care, and as well as compliance guidelines with efficiency of hospital workflow, and they can also reduce the cost of care. So again, I'm mentioning these. I know you're familiar with them. I just want you to know that all of these, the big takeaway about all of these things that I'm talking about is that they are put there as extra guardrails and safety rails to provide patient safety and efficiency. And you need to utilize them correctly, because you can have all these things, but if they're not utilized correctly, then what's the point? Okay. Okay. So before I go on to talk about the case I want to talk to you about, does anyone have any questions? All right. So I am going to be talking about the Rhonda Vaughn case, and I think it's really important. As I'm talking about this case, please take out a piece of paper and pen. I've just spoken to you about the error is human. I just spoke to you about the guardrails. I talked to you about system failures versus individual failures. And as I'm reading, I want you to kind of jot some notes down, what you think the red flags are, what you think errors might have been made. This is a very difficult case to talk about. It's going to affect you directly as nursing students that are going to be nurses. And it certainly is going to have a large impact on the community at large right now. Okay, so in 2017, Charlene Murphy was admitted to Vanderbilt Hospital for a brain injury. Her condition was improving, and she was making steps to discharge, so she was actually getting better. But she needed to have a PET scan before she left. She expressed a concern about claustrophobia. She was nervous about the procedure, so the doctor prescribed Versed, which is a short-acting sedative to help patients feel relaxed and sleepy. Some of you might have had this when you're going in for an MRI or something. So Rhonda Vaught, she's an ICU nurse, and she was tasked to retrieve the Versed from the computerized medication dispenser system, so the Pyxis. But instead, she grabbed a powerful paralyzer called Vecronium. According to the investigation report, the nurse overlooked several warning signs, and as she withdrew the wrong drug, including that Versed is a liquid, okay, and Vecronium is a powder. Okay, so Versed is a liquid and Vecronium actually is a powder that needs to be reconstituted. The nurse did not see the medication in the Pyxis. So she goes to the Pyxis, she opens up the patient's name, and she doesn't see it. So she hits an override button, and she types in the letters VE. Those of you who might have done this at clinical might type in a letter and you'll see a population of medications pop up, and then you click the one you want. So when she typed in the trade name, and it's not the generic name, so the Pix is basically autofilled. So she typed in VE instead of midazolam come up, which is what the generic name is. The generic name of Vicronium came up, and Vicronium is a neuromuscular paralytic agent, so it paralyzes the patient. So VE, Vicronium, it pops up. She doesn't look, she hits it. Draw pops open, she takes it. So just so you're aware, this medication does not sedate you. It doesn't make you unconscious. It paralyzes your muscles, including your diaphragm and your muscles of respiration, your intercostal muscles that help you breathe. That's what that medication does. So Rhonda overrides the Pyxis. She takes the Vicronium, she reconstitutes it, and she administers it to the patient. Also, according to reports, the Vicronium has a red warning label on the top. So a big red label on the top of the Vicronium that says paralytic drug. After the mid is administered, the patient is immediately placed in the PET scan. So there was no assessing the effects of Versed. So anytime you give a sedative as nursing students and as nurses, you should always assess the patient for the effect of that, right? So maybe an oxygen, an O2 monitor to see if it's depressed her respirations. I want to remind you at this point that the patient is already scared and anxious. She's about to go into the PET scan. She is told by the nurse that she's going to be giving something to help her relax. But instead, she's given something that paralyzes her in an ascending way. She's unable to speak, but she's completely conscious. She's able to feel pain. She feels discomfort, and she feels fear. But she's unable to move and progressively unable to breathe until she blacks out. She becomes unconscious, and she suffers irreversible brain damage, and she later dies. When they put her out of the PET scan, they found her pulseless and unconscious. A code was called, and then she was removed from the life support a couple of days later. This patient died in a torturous way in a hospital where you're supposed to go and feel safe. There is absolutely no denying that this nurse made a horrific error. She passed multiple security rails. But the question is, was her negligence criminal, or was it a massive system failure? And that's what we're going to discuss. Was it criminal, or was it a massive system failure? In order for you to think about this a little bit more, I'm going to give you a little bit more information. I did not follow this daily. Okay, so there might be a little bit more information, but I believe the information I'm giving you is correct. So Rhonda was an experienced ICU nurse. She was assigned to be the all nurse that day. It was basically essentially the charge nurse. She covered lunches. She helped out wherever she was needed. And on that day, she was also assigned to orient a new hire. So on top of her, already all her responsibilities in an ICU, she was actually asked to orient somebody. Her colleague called her because her colleague was on lunch and asked her if she could take down the Versed to the PET scan, because her patient needed to have this administered before she went in. So she gets a call. Listen, I'm on lunch break. Can you please get the Versed? This patient's getting 1 milligram and bring it down to the patient. They can't start the PET scan without it. So Rhonda pulls the medication from the Pyxis in the ICU because there's not one in the PET scan, which is downstairs. At the same time, Vanderbilt was actually in the process of transferring from an electric medical record to another one. I believe they were transferring over to Epic. And remember, with electronic medical records, doctors put in the orders, and then the pharmacy has to approve it, and then the nurse sees it and acknowledges it. This is created to add an extra level of safety. At this time, however, the medication was not crossing over to the Pyxis. And according to Rhonda, this was happening for a few weeks, and the nurses were told to override and get the medication. that they need that day on any particular patient. This was corroborated by other colleagues. Keep in mind, however, that normally you could not override to get another medication. So for example, if I decided my patient had a headache, there's no override button to get me Tylenol, okay? Whatever is prescribed for that patient is only in the Pyxis, unless it's an emergency medication. And Vacronium is not an emergency medication in that area. She also stated when she pulled the medication, she did not see a warning pop up. So normally if when you pull up something like Vacronium, a warning should pop up on the screen and says, warning, this is a paralytic agent. She states that she did not see this. So after the patient coded and Rhonda realized what she did, she immediately came forward and she told the hospital she made a terrible mistake. She also told the hospital that she did not document because she didn't scan. And the reason why she didn't scan was because there's no scanning system downstairs. So she said to them, I made this mistake. Do you want me to go in and document that I gave this medication? There's no documentation of it anywhere. The hospital told her no. The hospital also did not report it to the medical examiner's report. What they did do was fire her. And they paid the family out of the hospital money. They paid the family restitution. So they didn't report it. They fired her. The Tennessee Board of Nursing, of course, she was reported to the Tennessee Board of Nursing. The Tennessee Board of Nursing reviewed the case. And at that time, they did not find it egregious enough to revoke her nursing license. So she got fired, she left, and she still had her nursing license. The reason why the Tennessee Board of Nursing did not take her license is because of what we talked about earlier. So err is human. So the IOM basically says that healthcare workers are going to make errors and that the system often sets them up for failure. So they did not revoke her license. A few months later, somebody got an anonymous tip. It was reinvestigated. And Rhonda Vaughn was basically pulled in and charged for criminal negligence, homicide. So basically, she was arrested and charged with criminal negligence homicide. The hospital was not charged, and the hospital has not been brought to the court system as of now that I know. So that's the scenario. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you a very 3-minute video of something to do with her, and then I'm really interested in your thoughts on this, okay? Because it's like I said, significant for you. Sorry, give me 1 second while I get it. Is everyone doing okay? I'm not gonna. No, this is upsetting. Good, thank you. Sorry, just give me 1 minute. I'm just gonna mute for a minute because I know you can't hear me. And then any of my clinical students, once I start playing it, if you can hear it okay, just kind of give me a thought.
Can you get paid $2,000?
We're human and we make mistakes. That is the message from a group of nurses who have banded together to support a fellow nurse who's facing serious criminal charges. She admits she gave out the wrong medication, leading to a patient's death. Now, as Megan Alexander reports, she's on trial for reckless homicide.
This nurse is on trial for making a tragic mistake. Nurse Redonda Vaught was charged with reckless homicide in the death of 75-year-old Chaylene Murphy at Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. She was supposed to give her patient a mild sedative, but instead administered the powerful paralyzing agent Vacronium, which came with this label, warning paralyzing agent. In audio played at the trial, Nurse Vaught admitted to an investigator that she had been distracted.
My mistake caused the patient essentially to die.
The defendant violated everything that she had ever learned.
The defense sees it another way.
To err is human, to forgive is divine. Quite frankly, forgiveness has been in very short supply for Adonda Vaught.
The patient's family testified about the tragic mistake.
As I turned the corner, I saw my mother-in-law with all those people around her.
At times, it became too much for the nurse on trial. Fellow nurses, heroes of the pandemic, are rallying behind Nurse Vaught, and they're coming from around the country to show their support. Coworkers say Redonda Vaught owned up to her mistake right away, and she has remorse for the outcome. Her arrest came as a shock to many in the nursing community. This nurse flew all the way in from Las Vegas.
Nurses make errors. Every day, nurses make errors. If we are going to be tried criminally for making a human error without any ill intent, why is anyone going to keep going into the nursing profession? We have to be supported.
She faces 10 years in prison if she's found guilty.
The incident happened 4 years.
All right, let me just give me 1 minute to get my files back up. So, okay, so you've got the facts for the most part as you know them. And again, I just want to say this, that this is an atrocious, horrible event that happened, and she absolutely has responsibility in what happened. She knows this, and she absolutely came forward and said she did. So the question that I have is, was this completely on her, or were there system failures? And I'm interested to see or to hear what your thoughts on what the system failures were. So if you just raise your hand, Anna, why don't you jump in and start?
Hi. At first, when I heard about this, I was like, oh my gosh, they can't do this to her. You know, it's going to cause everybody to not come forward. The whole, blame-free just culture is going to go down the tubes, and that's going to ruin patient safety even more. But I did have a chance to read a really good article. I think it was put out by the Tennessee newspaper, and it was the whole timeline. And you can actually read all the documents and I didn't read the whole thing. It's 105 pages long. Yep. But she made so many mistakes. She didn't make just one.
And I'll just pause you there. What mistake? And then, so we're just going to start a running list now. So tell me the mistakes she made as simply as you
first of all, she was going to give Versed. She didn't know the drug. She didn't look it up to find out what it was, what it does, what she's supposed to assess before or after she gives it. She didn't read the entire autofill. She put in the brand name, not the generic. How she didn't see the paralytic warning on top of the drug that she was going to reconstitute, I have no idea, because she had to stick it at least twice. And then the dose of Versed was actually 2 milligrams, and she admits she only gave 1 of the paralyzing agent. So she didn't even give the right dose of the wrong drug. And then the system failures. And her overriding them.
Yep. So basically you're saying that she didn't pay it. So basically she put the wrong name in. She didn't look at the screen. She hit a medication when she actually didn't look at the screen. And then she then took that medication, and even with it in her hand was looking at it and did not verify what it was. So basically what you're telling me is that she did not perform the 5 rights.
She didn't perform the 5 rights. And I don't know how she could look at that vial. She had to inject it once to reconstitute it. She had to inject it again to pull the drug out. I don't know how she couldn't see it.
Yep. So who would like to say
this is all on her? There's definitely system errors, but she made so many mistakes. It's not just one mistake.
Right, which possibly could have been eliminated. Not possibly, 100% would have been eliminated by the 5 rights. Stephanie, would you like to talk to me about why you think she did make those mistakes. What happened that could have attributed to her making those errors? What do you think?
Well, I actually had my hand raised because you had mentioned that there was an anonymous tip that came forward. So I was wondering what the nature of that was, because if she was going around, I don't know, if she had said something after the fact or there was more information, it just seems like something's missing. If I'd like to understand what that tip was, because that might fill in some of the blanks.
Yeah.
But I guess aside from, you don't have that information, do you?
No, but I think it was reported to like Medicare. It was reported to some kind of organization, but no, I don't. I wanted to focus on the
Yeah,
what her
I know.
errors were. Yeah,
I know.
that's
I
okay.
know.
I know it's interesting, right? You want to know all
Yeah.
the details. So what do you
Because
think might have contributed to her? This is a very, for all intents and purposes, apparently this is a very experienced ICU nurse. She draws up medications all the time. What do you think could have attributed? What human error attributed her to not looking at the Pyxis, to any of that stuff?
Distraction. Too
And
many
why
things.
was she distracted?
Because she
What could
was she was doing someone else's job. So in terms of delegation, maybe she had too many responsibilities that day. She was training somebody, orienting them. She had to cover somebody's lunch. She had, what else did you say? A lot of different things going on.
Right. So complacency. So this is an ICU nurse that's really experienced. Someone says, go to the Pyxis and pull me up. And I'm saying this to you because once you become nurses, and you'll see how automatic your pulling of the medication becomes, I'm not excusing it because there's no excuse. What I'm saying is that you have an experienced nurse that goes in and she's thinking, all right, I'm just going to pull this Versed, and she pulls it. She doesn't look at the screen. It pops up one medication. She hits it. She takes it out. So definitely human error there. So complacency. Nicole, anything to comment about that?
Well, she was only a nurse for 2 years. So putting a nurse that is only experienced for 2 years to be charged and to be helping hands for the hospital is kind of ridiculous. But the distractions that go into place when you have all that going on, it kind of it distracts you from being able to do that. And having the computer system down, she didn't even have the third check, which would be scanning the patient, then you scan the medication, and it would show you that it's the wrong medication. She didn't have the first 2 checks because it was down.
Right.
She didn't have the scanner. My thing is I think that she should have lost her license from the get-go. But the only reason why this was brought up was because there was an anonymous tip. The nursing board revisited this, then took her license away, and now she's brought up with charges. I think she should have lost it, or some kind of re-education, because maybe she never gave Versed and she didn't know it was a liquid. Maybe she did. She was an ICU nurse. I'm sure they give that more often, but they didn't take her license right away. And I feel like this is just to cover. I think, in all honesty, it's the hospital that should have some kind of responsibility with this. And it just shows us that we need to cover ourselves. We need to make sure that we do what we're taught in nursing school.
Right. You're absolutely correct. So tell me, by accident, I dropped everybody's hands. Can somebody tell me about the system failures? James Karam. What are the system failures? What was wrong? How did the system fail her?
I personally think that if she's charge nurse, she shouldn't also be in charge of orienting someone.
Okay, so that's the first. So you think that's a system failure. What else? What else about the system, the way it was set up, failed her?
Well, she didn't have a scanner downstairs.
Perfect. She did not have a scanner downstairs. Absolutely. So she was orienting. She did not have a scanner. So if she went down to give a medication, if she had scanned the bracelet and she had scanned the medication, would a warning have come up and said that this is the wrong medication?
Most likely,
100%.
yes.
100% it would have. And it's happened to me. I have gone into the Pyxis. I have pulled a medication where sometimes it's in like there's a bunch of medication and it'll say draw 5. And I've grabbed the packet from drawer 4. I have gone to the bedside. I have scanned that patient's bracelet, and then I have scanned that medication, and it has told me that that is the wrong medication. So there's no scanner downstairs. There's no Pyxis downstairs, and she's orienting somebody. What else wasn't downstairs? And what else didn't she do after she gave the medication?
There's no
Aversa?
monitoring equipment downstairs, so they weren't even monitoring the patient after she was received the medication.
Right. So oxygen, right? So the oximeter. So the system failure perhaps might be, after this is all said and done, that anytime, remember this implement for change, anytime you administer a medication like Versed, you have to, at least for I don't know how many minutes, whatever they decide, put a pulse oximetry on that patient, and you need to assess them for the next 5 minutes to see the reaction. That is going to be a policy. Maybe there's a sign off. Maybe there needs to be 2 people there. So this tragic event, people need to come in together, and that's the big takeaway as well. Is what are we going to do to prevent this? What are we going to do to prevent this error before? So there was no Pyxis downstairs. There was no bar scanner downstairs. There was no pulse oximetry downstairs. So none of those, had those all been in place, perhaps this would have perhaps prevented this human error. Okay. And it was a big human error. But those system things that to protect her, those technological things that I told you that have saved people's lives. But the other big thing is those 5 rights, right? Those, it's nice to have the computer to kind of like help you, but those are something that you can kind of do individually. So
that
anything else?
brings, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I was gonna say that brings up a question for me. Couldn't she have brought a WOW downstairs with her?
Perhaps. I mean, she absolutely could possibly do that. I mean, I'm trying to think, would I grab something? I've had to go down and give medication. So here's the difference. I've had to go down and give medication to people, but the technology that I have access to is on my phone, which again, this is a great thing, right? On my phone, I can actually scan a patient's bracelet with my phone. And this was really kind of, we had this technology, I did not realize it until COVID came out, because you didn't want to bring those WOWs into the machine. So on my phone, I can go in, I scan the patient's bracelet off my phone, and then I scan the medication. Why? Maybe they don't have access to that. Hopefully they will now. And again, maybe that's like you absolutely, because the bottom line is you should never administer a medication without scanning it, ever. It's why we have the technology. Did they used to do that all the time? Yes. Do I think that's probably a policy at their hospital? It should be. Do nurses become complacent? Yes, they do. And this is a wake-up call to everybody not to do that. Anything else that we missed about this?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about like the hospital.
Yes.
Like, and the way
Aaron,
that
you're
they told her not to, document and stuff like that. And sometimes to me, it seems as though that they don't want the documentation there because if they need to kind of spin the situation, like sometimes they say, oh, when there's an incident report, less is better because you don't want to put yourself and open up a can of worms. And so I thought that it was kind of crazy that they acted on her like that. Like they fired her immediately, but then there was like no documentation put in after when she asked, should I document? I mean, I didn't get to put it because of the system failures. And not only that, as an institution, they should have realized that you have a huge workload in a hospital setting, and then your systems are down. So there should have been more support for the staff.
Yeah, so that's something we really kind of haven't talked about yet. That's just an excellent point. So we didn't talk about the fact that, and this is where I think the system failed her as well. And again, when I say these things, I am not in any way excluding her because she herself has taken blame and she absolutely should take blame. But at the same time, the system failure is that, as she had stated, and apparently that has corroborated, they were switching over systems. So those safety rails that are normally in place for them are not in place. So they were switching over to Epic, and apparently all of the nurses were overriding their daily medications because they couldn't access their medications without it. That's huge. So basically the guardrail that's in place to provide safety for the patient, the nurses are overriding it at direction of the hospital. Okay, so that's a problem. Another thing nobody's mentioned that hopefully will come out of this is not a medication. This paralytic agent should never have been available. This never should have been available to this ICU to override to get that. I that's my opinion. That is my opinion. I think that if there's a medication, I think that belongs in certain Pyxis, and I don't think that her Pyxis qualified for that paralytic agent. I just don't. I don't know. Aaron, your thoughts?
Yeah, so oh, sorry, I hear it now. Go. I followed this case very closely, and one thing that I think is important to note is the medical examiner had initially ruled the patient's death as natural causes. And another thing is when the board of nursing got that anonymous tip, they still decided not to pursue disciplinary action against her. It wasn't until after the hospital had made noise about it because they were in danger of losing their reimbursements from Medicare and Medicaid.
From Medicare, exactly. They would have lost.
Why they chose to pursue action against her. And I think that although yes, she obviously made errors and she should be held accountable, I don't think she should have been charged criminally because I think the hospital should have more responsibility in this than she does.
I would tend to, 100%. I agree that I think that we can list all the errors that she made. We've listed that there are system errors for sure. So, without a doubt, I think there were definitely system errors as well. So the question remains is, should this nurse be charged criminally? Should she go to jail? In the end, she's convicted, right? So the conviction is that she faces 3 to 6 years for gross negligence, and 1 to 2 years for criminal negligent homicide. So she's going to jail. She's going to jail, and the hospital, as far as I know, has not been taken into court, not charged. They did do this out-of-pocket settlement to the family members. And it's also worth noting that the family itself did not want criminal charges against this nurse. They forgave the nurse. They spoke to the nurse, and they said that the mother would not want her criminally charged. So so it's very difficult. So it's a lot to take in. So at the end of the day, what does this mean for you, and what is the impact on nurses? And that's and that's kind of what we're gonna see where that happens, right? Because now is the fear going to be all those things that we talked about you. And by the way, I think the deaths from that to err is human, the 98,000 deaths a year. I think we went from 98,000 deaths a year to 7,000 deaths. So clearly it worked, right? Clearly providing this atmosphere of safety and non-blame, and we need to re-educate and we need to implement change. It has been working accordingly. According to the numbers, it's been working. So what is going to be the result of this? What is going to be the result? Are people going to be afraid to come forward and to admit a medication error?
Well, I also follow a lot of nurses on social media and everything, and they have been posting their thoughts obviously on the case, and a lot of the more popular, if you would, nurses that I follow have been saying that a lot of people have been reaching out to them saying that they either dropped out of nursing school, completely rescinded their application, or just decided not to go forward and going into nursing school. And
so what you're having, so what you're having here is there's a lot of backlash. Absolutely. So we're already understaffed, which is going to create nursing error. People are completely stressed over COVID, myself included. I see it all the time on my floor. It's very difficult for me in my own unit to see and unfortunately, when things happen, people they're just disillusioned. They're exhausted. So simple things like, the 5 rights or standing outside a patient's door for, to provide a safety check. They're not doing it. People are becoming complacent. People are exhausted. People are overworked. They're understaffed. And now this happens, and there's a nurse that's going to jail. Now, again, you can have an opinion whether she should or not. And I'm not saying, I'm not going to tell you mine either way. What I'm just saying is that this definitely affects you. It affects how you become involved in possibly political policy, and how you're going to conduct yourselves going forward. My feeling is no matter how long you've been a nurse, there are policies and evidence-based research that are put in for a place. It doesn't mean that I don't make errors. I have made errors. I anticipate I will make errors. Does this scare the living crap out of me? 100%. Does it make me more attentive? Yes, it does. So we just have to kind of remind ourselves of that. So I'm going to take one last thoughts from somebody quickly, because I'm going to want to give you a little bit break. Somebody who hasn't gone and would like to participate. Anyone else? Ryan, jump in. Ryan,
Well, I was just going to say, it's become completely clear that you can't trust any corporation that employs you to have your best interests at heart, and that they will always sell you out if it helps their bottom line 100%. And
yeah,
this is a classic
I don't
case.
necessarily, yeah, I don't necessarily disagree with you, which is, I mean, in a sense that we are educated though, right? I'm educating you to the best of my ability. You have to go out and continue to, it's not even just about protecting yourself, it's about protecting the patient. So this happened to somebody, right? This happened to somebody. So you as nurses have to protect your patient. And the way you protect your patient is to take the information, the evidence-based research that has told you that if you do this, 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 and this, your patient will be safe. And if your environment, if your hospital is not providing you the tools, the policy, the technology to safeguard, it is your absolute right to advocate for your patient or advocate yourself to a hospital that will support you. So
it is clear that she could have prevented this, in so many different ways, her
Sure.
own. And it's clear that the hospital was also liable for many mistakes along the way. But when it came down to it, the hospital instantly tried to cover it up. And then when it turned out that they were going to lose money, they brought it back up and threw her down the hole, for their bottom line. And I'm not saying that, I'm not even talking about whose responsibility it was. I'm just talking about, her as humans and as nurses and as people who are have kindness in their heart. We instantly want to take accountability for what we do. And she did that. She took accountability for it, thinking that her best nature would lead to their best nature. And they simply don't care.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a lot there. There's a lot to unpack. It's devastating. It's sad. There's a lot to talk about. If we could talk about this for hours. But again, I just wanted to point out that there were definite system failures, 100% failures on her part. What you take from that going forward. Again, the 5 rights, the technology, hopefully you're utilizing that. We'll see as we go forward and you follow this case to see, what happens. Obviously, there's a lot of nurses rallying around her. It's just a very frightful time. I'm going to end this discussion. I know that I kind of blew through those slides. I did so because I felt like this topic was extremely important and I felt like it was worthy of our discussion. I could have really just spent the hour talking about it. But it is my obligation as your instructor to introduce these 2 topics, which you have been assigned. So before I go, I just want to remind you that this Plan, Do, Study, Act is something that you should be familiar with. It is implemented for change, and just be aware of what is supposed to be happening in those 4 boxes. And then also remember, we talked about the blame-free environment, blame-free versus justice. I would be familiar with that slide as well. I know that Professor Mabilia has an excellent topic for you coming up that I know you're going to find really interesting, and I'm running over a little bit late, so she'll probably give you a few minutes break. I appreciate that you participating. I know that all of you had valuable insight, and I would have really liked to hear more from everybody and your thoughts. But I appreciate you participating and listening, and that's it. If you have any follow-up questions, you can certainly email me, and that's it. All right. Good luck with your next your topic. All right. Thank you. You have a great day, everybody.
Thank you, Professor.
Yep.
Oh, you can't hear me.
Sorry, Professor, I'm trying to
No,
get
that's
out of you.
okay.
Can I get, I'm trying to get rid of my slide.
That's okay. It's Professor Mobility. I want to give you a couple-minute break. I'm going to give you only a 5-minute break. And then we're going to come back and talk about DVTs. Okay? So 5 minutes, and I'll see you all soon.
Professor Mobilio, how do I get rid of my, are you able to override my thing, or do I
You
need
have
to?
to stop sharing. I could try to see if I'm going to
Oh,
share
let me see
now.
if I can stop sharing.
No, you have to stop sharing.
All right. Oh, boy.
We'll figure this out. We have 5 minutes.
I got this. Well, I'm gonna need those 5 minutes. Hold on. All right, I'm gonna go to navigate slide.
I think there's that little button right in the center. So go back to where you were going to add it and where you went to add it, and then a
Oh, you can
share,
see it?
right? There's a little circle and there's a square inside that circle.
Oh, stop sharing. Okay. Oh, there you are. Okay.
You did. Yeah, perfect.
Okay, good. Excellent. All right, thank you. Yeah,
Okay,
we were just talking about the Rhonda Vaughn case from
one in
the lady
Texas.
that, yeah. So we got carried away
Wow.
a little bit, but yeah, it was good.
That's a great topic for your content. That's a great story for your content.
Yeah, it was good. We spent the most of it
Yeah.
talking, but we could have talked about it for another hour, but it was, it's a fascinating case. So,
Yeah.
all right.
Great.
Well, again,
Okay.
sorry for bumping into your time, but,
No problem.
all right. I will see you later. Bye.
Okay, great. Thanks. Okay, everybody back? Hopefully.
Yes.
You're there? Okay, so you're there, great. Okay, wonderful. So wow, that was such a great topic she had there, huh? So I think mine is pretty cool, but I don't know. Hers was pretty great. So you will see. Hers is real life experiences, but DVTs are also real life experiences too, unfortunately. And maybe some of you know people who've had DVTs. So anyway, welcome back. Our topic is deep vein thrombosis. And I'm going to start today's lecture, as I always start my lectures, with what? With a little bit of getting up and moving the blood around to prevent a DVT. So I thought today was totally apropos. Sometimes I tend to want to skip this because of time, but it just goes to show you how important it is to get ourselves up and moving and everyone up and moving, our patients too. So we're going to take 2 minutes. Everybody stand up. All right. I don't know if you can see me, but you don't need to see me. So everybody's going to reach up high. Now we're going to reach down, touch our toes, reach up high, reach down, touch our toes, reach up. One more time. And now we're going to reach down, touch our toes. Now we're going to start marching in place. Okay. We're going to march in place for a little bit, swing our arms, move our legs. Now we're going to do a little bit of grapevine, which is we go to the side, bring one leg back. We're going to do about 10 of these. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, now we're going to do some squats. We're going to bend down, then we're going to come up and bring our arm over the opposite shoulder. Squat down, bring our arm up over the opposite shoulder. Squat down, bring our arm up over the opposite shoulder. Squat down, arm up and over. Squat down, arm up and over. Squat down, arm up and over. We're rotating the arms, by the way. Squat down, arm up and over. Squat down. Okay, arm up and over. Okay, everybody get the blood moving around a little bit. Get my chair back. Okay, and we're going to start. All right, so I do that for a couple reasons. One is to get everybody up, get the energy flowing, so we're all not just sitting there and taking our shallow breaths, right? And potentially going into a state of acidosis. No, it would take a little bit more than that to do that, but you know what I mean. We're not taking deep breaths, but also to get the blood moving around. And it's so important because that is one of the ways that can cause the DVT is by venous stasis, which we're going to learn about in a couple of minutes. Okay. You know what? Before I start my topic, I just want to mention something. You guys have your clues due this week. And I know in my clinical group yesterday, we reviewed a little bit of what is expected. There is a rubric out there. So look at the rubric because that's what you're going to be graded on. And if you do not meet satisfactory in every single category, you're going to have to do it again. And I know, but nobody wants to redo it. You're going to have to redo that section that was not satisfactory or where you did not meet the expectations. So just take a quick look at the rubric. One of the things that people do not do is they don't apply their writing. When you write that little article, you're going to have to get an article and you're going to have to just write a little paper, a small little paper, APA format on it, and make sure you apply the article to your patient or your patient to the article. You want to connect the two. So often I see somebody just write, say you're writing on COPD, you'll just tell me about COPD. Okay, that's all great and fine, but how does this apply to your patient? So don't forget to include that piece. Okay, because I want you all to do well on it. Okay, let's get back to DVT. All right. So I always start with the concept map, tissue perfusion. So what time on Fridays it due? I'm guessing by midnight. Usually it's 11:59. It's usually our time for everything that's due. Okay, so it's the flow of blood through the body by which nutrients and oxygen are delivered to cells and waste products are removed, okay, as supported by the anatomical structures, the heart, the blood vessels, and related body functions. So tomorrow we are going to talk about peripheral vascular disease. And what's really important for you to know and understand is that we have a system in our body from the heart, right? The blood comes out from the heart and it goes from the heart, it pumps through the heart and it goes to the lungs. When it goes to the lungs, it gets some nice oxygen. It gets that nice oxygen and then it goes back out through the whole body and it delivers the oxygen to the cells and it brings back the CO2, right? Okay, so we are delivering the oxygen, and that's going to be, that is a very, very important piece of tissue perfusion. And I'm going to really pull it together tomorrow, much more so than today's topic. So the outcomes can be negative or positive. A positive outcome is nice warmth to the perfused area, to your extremities. You can get nice warm hands, nice warm feet to your extremities, warmth, free of pain, no pain. You're going to be oriented because if you don't have oxygen flowing to your brain, you can start to become confused. You can also have appropriate organ function so that if your kidneys are not getting the oxygen it needs and your whole body, all of your organs, it's not going to function appropriately. The negative outcomes are where your organs are not going to function appropriately, which is on the right-hand column there, the second to the bottom, decreased organ function, which can then lead to death. But let's start with the first one on the left of under negative, ischemic pain. What is ischemia? I think I've talked about this before. What is ischemia? Or maybe it was just in my clinical group. Ischemia is lack of blood flow. Okay, not necessarily always death. That's the extreme consequence. Ischemia is where you get lack of blood flow. All right, ischemia, lack of blood flow, can lead to tissue death, not always. So first you get the lack of blood flow, and hopefully we can prevent the tissue death, the tissue necrosis. It does lead to it. Okay, so it starts out with just that lack of blood flow, ischemia, and then you get the tissue death. So you can become, remember I was mentioning, if the brain does not get oxygenated, you can become confused, you can pass out, you can faint, loss of fine tactile sensation. Yeah, I'm going to talk a lot about my clinical yesterday because many of my students had patients who had somewhere on, there was half the floor, I think, was on heparin drip. Many of the patients had problems with circulation to their extremities, and they had peripheral vascular disease. So several of them, I know, Brittany, your patient, sensation was extremely diminished in that left foot. Compartment syndrome, you're going to learn about compartment syndrome when you do ortho, and decreased organ function and death. Okay, we talked about that. What are the objectives? To describe the pathophysiology of a deep vein thrombosis. How does it happen? And what causes a deep vein thrombosis to happen? Identify the risk factors and how can we prevent it? What are the clinical manifestations? What's it going to look like? And how about DVTs across the lifespan? Do pregnant women get DVTs? Absolutely. They are at higher risk for DVTs, and we're going to talk about that. And then we're going to talk about medications that we use to treat the DVTs. You do need to know these medications. Definitions. I put this on the on Blackboard, so hopefully some of you have already learned a little bit about this, so it's going to make today's discussion so much easier. So thrombus. What is thrombus? What is phlebitis? What is thrombophlebitis? Oh, I didn't give you the answers. Okay. All right. So we'll talk about what the answers are. You could tell me what the answers are. What is a thrombus? Okay, a blood clot. Excellent. Okay, a thrombus is a blood clot that forms in a vein or an artery. Yes, that's a blood clot. Excellent. So different things happen if it forms in the artery versus the vein. And part of this lecture, it's really DVT, peripheral vascular disease, kind of combined because they go hand in hand. But I'm going to tell you this now, and I'm going to tell you this tomorrow because it is so important. When you're looking at peripheral vascular disease, you need to think about the direction of the blood flow. Is it going to the periphery? Is it going to the brain? Is it going to the fingertips? Is it going to my feet? Or is it coming back with the deoxygenated blood? Okay. Is it going to deliver the oxygen, or is it coming back with deoxygenated blood? So that is extremely important because, well, it's both. So a thrombus can form in both systems, because if it forms in the artery, it can travel somewhere. So from the artery, usually it can travel. Peripheral arterial disease is arterial, yes. And then you can get a clot in the artery, or you can get a clot in the vein. Today, we're going to talk about a clot in the vein. Tomorrow, we're going to talk a little bit more about the clot in the artery, not so much. You're going to get that next year. And that, if it's in the artery, it can then travel to the lungs. It can travel to, well, any of these clots can travel, I should say. A DVT can hold on, let's just go back to the definitions. I'm getting ahead of myself. So a thrombus is a clot, and it's in a vein, okay? It can be in a vein or an artery, okay? Now remember, the arterial system, the arteries, which way do they go? Do they go to, well, you tell me, where do they go?
Artery away and vein is 2. Or I know artery is away
from the heart. Yes, it starts in the heart, and it has nice oxygenated blood. This is the artery, and it goes to the peripheral, right? To the periphery, okay? It's going to go away from the heart. And then the venous system is going to come back. So when you're answering questions and you're thinking about what is happening with this vein, with this clot, think about which direction it's going. Okay. It's kind of like are we going north on Route 8? Okay. Back up to the heart, or are we going south on Route 8 and down to the feet and the toes and the hands? Okay. So you want to think about which direction, because different things can happen depending on the direction. Okay. So that's all I just want you to know that. And it's going to apply even more so in tomorrow's lecture when we talk about peripheral vascular disease. Okay. What is phlebitis? Itis. Okay. Inflammation of the vein. Excellent. Excellent. So let's put the two together. We get a thrombophlebitis. We get a blood clot in the vein. So there's a superficial thrombophlebitis. That is a clot near the skin surface, versus a deep vein thrombosis, which is it's located deep in the muscle, the veins that run into the muscle. So it's deeper, versus a superficial one. Superficial ones are not usually that much of a problem. It's the deep vein thromboses that are much more of a problem. Pulmonary embolism. I'm sure everybody's heard the term a PE, and a PE is a clot that travels. Okay, and it travels to the lung and it gets stuck in the lung. Okay, and if the lung cannot move and expand, and then it can't deliver the oxygen, can collapse the lung, a patient can die. Many patients die of PEs frequently, seriously. Okay, it is a serious problem. That's why I love this topic, because it's very relevant. You're going to be using it pretty frequently. Okay, so what is a deep vein thrombosis? This is a situation where blood clot fills the interior of the vein. So you can see, let me see, I'm going to get my pointer. Okay, do you see? I don't know what I got here. Hold on. Do you see me circling?
No.
No? Okay. All right, let me try this. This has a hand. Hold on. No? All right. I just want to be able to use the pointer. Oh, I thought I had it. Sorry. No? No, huh? Oh, goodness gracious. What happened to my hand? Why is it not letting me? No, huh? You still can't. Let me know if you can see it. I have it pointed, I have it highlighted, and then it doesn't do anything.
How about the pen, like if you were going to write on the slide?
The pen, is that around here?
It's in the right.
It's in the right? Okay, I'm on the left. Let me try the pen. Maybe that will help. All right. So here, okay, I'll use the pen. All right, not my favorite, but it's okay. It's mightier than the hand, yeah. Thank you all. Okay, so right in here, right in this area, is right inside the vein is where a blood clot is going to start to form. And the blood clot forms, and when it forms, it obstructs the blood flow. You can look to the clot on the left here, right in here. Look at what's happening. Can the blood flow? No, it's like getting stuck. It's turning around. So once this clot starts to form, it can be a serious problem and it can block the blood flow. Does it happen to have a valve? Yes. So there are valves. Here's a situation right here. Here's a valve. And this helps move the blood flow back up. But sometimes if genetically you have a problem with the valves in your vein, you can have a problem with the blood moving back up. But there's a couple of things. We're going to talk about that next that can be a problem for it. So how does it happen? All right. Is it a vein problem? Is it a valve problem in the vein? Is it from the vein? We're going to talk about it. So what causes a clot to form? Someone's called, his name is Virchow. Virchow, he created a triad, 3 things that he came up with that are associated with clot formation. The first one is circulatory stasis. What does that mean? That's developed from immobility. That's for someone, this can happen for someone who sits all day long. That's one of the reasons why I have us all get up and move those legs around. And those of you who are sitting right now, which I think, yeah, long plane rides, those of you who are sitting right now, because you could be sitting for 2-3 hours, right? That's why I give you a little break, get up, move around. But we can also be sitting and moving our legs around. Okay. Even if you're in a car, on a plane, long plane ride, you want to make sure that you are moving those legs. We're going to talk about what you can do, but that is a cause. Immobility. Who else is immobile besides people on plane rides? Someone that we go to the hospital and take care of? Obese people, but also our patients, right? Are our patients moving around? Most of them are not, unless we get them up and ambulate them. That's why I'm all about ambulate, ambulate, ambulate. They are at high risk of developing a DVT. And we're going to talk about what we do to prevent that. Another thing that can cause a clot to form is vascular damage. So when the blood vessel, the vein, is damaged, it can stimulate the clotting cascade of platelets. They come running to the scene. Okay, like when you get a cut on your hand or something, it stimulates the clotting cascade so that platelets can form and you can stop bleeding so you don't bleed out. Your body just does that naturally. So we get some fibrin there and we get some platelets, and that's what's going to help the body clot and your little wound clot. Now, if you fall, a patient falls, anybody falls, and you hit your leg or you hit your vein bad enough, you can cause some damage and you can get a DVT from that, believe it or not. So this is another cause of a DVT. The third cause is certain conditions put you at a state of hypercoagulability. What conditions cause a person to be in a state of hypercoagulability? Does anybody know? Orthopedic surgery, pregnancy, absolutely. Chemotherapy, cancer, absolutely. Atrial fibrillation, birth control, fantastic, fantastic. All these things put you in that situation. So here is Virchow's triad. The stasis of the blood, you're not moving around, okay? You're just sitting there. You sit there all day long at your computer and you don't get up and you don't go take a walk. You don't move around. You're at risk of a DVT. endothelial injury. So this can be any kind of injury to the vein. It can be a problem with your valves. Is there anything that is, potentially an injury, or you have an injury to your vein, you are at risk. And the third one is just a state of being in a hypercoagulable state. Pregnant women are in a hypercoagulable state. Okay, so here are the locations of the DVTs. You do not have to know this, but it's just kind of good to see. So here we have the popliteal vein on the left. You can look at this where they start out. They're deeper versus the superficial ones. Here is the superficial one. Okay, the greater saphenous vein. This is superficial versus the other ones, which are deeper. Right up through here, they're deeper. Down here, they're deeper. So these are the deeper ones, not the superficial ones. Okay, back to etiology. What can cause it? So we started to talk briefly about this. So venous clots, they occur where the blood flow is low. All right, arterial. So remember I mentioned there's two systems. Which way are we going on the highway? Okay, are we going down away from the heart? Or are we coming back up? Are we going north? Or are we going south? So if we're going up. Okay, so veins go up, yes. So arteries go down and they carry the oxygen. So arterial clots, they occur at sites of arterial plaque rupture. So that can happen where the plaque can rupture, and that can also cause a clot. So it can be complications of hospitalizations, can cause it, surgery can cause it, immobilization. All right, so I'm sure every single one of you, and if you have not, I don't know, talk to your clinical instructor about making sure that you have this experience. I'm sure every single one of you has given heparin sub-Q. Right? Is anybody here not given heparin sub-Q at least once so far in clinical? Okay, so not you, Karen? No. Oh my goodness. Okay. I think my students, I think have given, no, some of you have not. Okay. So why do we give heparin sub-Q? Those of you who've given it, which I think is the rest of the 100 of you, prophylaxis. Excellent, Stephanie. Prophylaxis for what? DVT prophylaxis. Excellent. So we want to be preventing a blood clot. Now, let me tell you this. I don't know if you guys have learned about core measures or not, but DVT prophylaxis is a core measure. So that means that every single patient has to be on DVT prophylaxis. It does not have to be heparin sub-Q. It often is. It has to be some type of DVT prophylaxis so that they do not get a clot. And that came about because so many patients were getting clots because they were immobile. So now, Joint Commission, they've come out with the fact that you need to be on DVT. All patients need to be on DVT prophylaxis. I was at a point where, I was working with the managers to check every patient to make sure they had something in place for it. And if the patient does not want to be on it, okay, then the provider has to document why the patient is not on DVT prophylaxis. Like maybe they're independent and they're ambulating a lot and they don't need that subcutaneous shot of heparin that the patients don't always really like, as you know, those of you who've given it. But yes, heparin sub-Q is one of the most common things that we give our patient for DVT prophylaxis, not only for prevention, but to treat a DVT, correct? So there are different doses, Sandy. Yes, we do give heparin for DVT prophylaxis. Anybody know the dose that we give for DVT prophylaxis? It's 5,000 units, but it depends on how concentrated it is. It's a tiny concentration, great, Nicole, of heparin versus someone who has a DVT. Yes, Sandy, we do treat it with heparin, but we treat it with heparin drip and we treat it with a much higher dose based on the size of the patient. Why heparin sub-Q versus PO med like warfarin, Eliquis, etc. We are going to get to that. Excellent question, Karina. It's later on in my PowerPoint. I'm going to get to all that because the medications are extremely important. You need to know the medications for two reasons. One is they are definitely going to be on the exam. And the other reason is because it's all over your clinical. Okay. If you want to take care of patients, you need to know about these anticoagulants and what they do, how they work. You need to know about them. So many patients are on them. So many, at least, I mean, I'd say there's probably about 25% of the patients in the hospital are either on well, everyone's on, most are on heparin sub-Q, but they're on something for DVT prophylaxis. But there's also other problems that are associated. And then we put them, hold on, I got one of those. Ugh, sorry, I'm trying to get rid of this call from wherever about my insurance, or those calls. Anyway, okay. So immobility DVT prophylaxis. I'm going to get to that, Kim, okay? Cancer. Patients who have certain types of cancer are also at risk for DVT. In particular, pancreatic cancer, lung cancer, ovarian cancer, testes, urinary tract cancer, breast cancer, stomach cancers. In particular, they are. And also some chemotherapies put a patient at risk. Obviously, the oncologist, the provider, will know about this and know if they need to put a patient on an anticoagulant or something. Okay, so they will know it. Pregnancy and deliver. Bone cancers. Bones, yes. I'm only naming some. There can be many more. These are some of the common ones. Bone is important because orthopedic surgeries put you at risk of a DVT. And the reason for that, so if you work on an ortho floor, or if you're on an ortho floor, 50% of DVTs come from orthopedic surgeries, such as hip replacements, knee replacements, hip fractures. They're the highest, okay? Because there's something in the bone when they do these orthopedic procedures or orthopedic fractures. You have a fracture, a bone fracture. You're also at risk of a DVT. Something in the bone that puts you in this hypercoagulable state. Remember those three things: venous stasis, injury to the vein, and a hypercoagulable state. Orthopedic surgery, hypercoagulable state. Pregnancy, certain cancers. So cancer, I'm not going to ask you which cancer. Okay, just know that cancer patients are at risk. And also chemotherapy patients, they are at risk of a DVT. Hormone therapy. So what is hormone therapy? Patients who take hormones, correct? Like estrogen. In particular, oral contraceptives, hormone replacements. So patients who take estrogen are at an increased risk of DVT. What else? Clotting disorders, okay? Obesity, right? If you are obese, you're at increased risk, and also a family history of DVT. So if you have a relative that has had a PE or a DVT in the past, you're at risk also. And we started to talk about, let me just see if I have it further on in my PowerPoint. Okay, I'm getting into it more. Orthopedic procedures, all right, is also risk of it. Okay, orthopedic procedures, about 50% of orthopedic patients have DVTs. So we have to really be careful with that. How about previous DVTs? Yes. If you have had a DVT in the past, you are someone who is prone to getting DVTs, and most likely, I'm not a provider, and even the providers will tell you that it's individual, very individual, but most of those patients will need to be on it for life. Okay, so if you've had a DVT at age 65, most likely you bought yourself a prescription for an anticoagulant for the rest of your life because you are now at risk for it. I believe, and I would guess that it would depend on how it occurred. Was it a one-time thing from a plane? You probably still have to believe it. I think that you're still at risk. So it's really up to the provider to take the whole picture into consideration. Patients who have atrial fibrillation, they're at risk of clots, okay? Because you haven't learned about atrial fibrillation yet, but what happens with atrial fibrillation is the atrium in the heart starts to fibrillate. It's kind of just quivering there. It's not, the blood is not rushing through the atrium. It's not filling and then closing and moving on to the next chamber, into the ventricle. It's staying in that atrium. When it stays in the atrium, what's happening to the blood? It has venous stasis. It's staying there. Okay. And when you get venous stasis, excellent, you are prone to clots. So those are the patients who are prone to a stroke. You hear all over TV about patients who have atrial fibrillation because that blood is fibrillating there, not moving along. So remember, it's when the blood is static, we have venous stasis, it's not moving, that the blood wants to start getting together with the other platelets and forming a clot. We don't want that to happen. So those patients are at risk of a PE, or it can travel to the brain where you can get a stroke. So very, very serious. I had a patient, this is a true story, when I was a stroke coordinator, they came to me, the nurses came to me and they said, we're getting an admission. Someone from St. Martin, yes, as in the island. We're like, wow. Okay, so someone who lives locally in Watertown, Connecticut, took a trip to St. Martin, and all of a sudden, stroke is very sudden. She had a stroke in St. Martin. This woman was an educator, actually, in Region 15 at Pomperog High School. She was retired. She was a fabulous, fabulous person, really enjoyed life, taught yoga, taught exercise classes, really involved in her health. Okay. So this is the person in St. Martin. Well, they didn't have treatment of DVT, TPA down there to give her. So it was too late. By the time the family brought her up here, her husband got a plane, brought her up here. She was admitted to Waterbury Hospital. It was too late for us to really do anything. Very, very sad. She ended up passing away a few years ago. Very, very sad situation. But anyway, they had discovered atrial fibrillation in her a short while ago. She talked the cardiologist into taking her off an anticoagulant because she felt she moved around, she wouldn't need it. She talked whoever this cardiologist was into getting off it, and then a few years later, she has a stroke. So she did have a known history of atrial fibrillation. She was on an anticoagulant and she got off it. So, it's very individual as to who's going to get off it. But for the most part, once you have a DVT or a clot, a PE, DVT, you need to be on anticoagulants for life. We're going to get more into the medications in a couple of minutes. So acute myocardial infarction, ischemic stroke, oral contraception and estrogen therapy puts you at a higher risk. Okay, so with that, what does a DVT look like? It's often probably because vascular damage. Vascular damage is one of the three. Remember the three? Okay, so here we have a picture of what it looks like. Let me grab my little pen. So see this red line? Not always the case, but sometimes it happens. Okay, so we can get a red line. We can get, first of all, I want us to start with the top one. We can get symptoms. Are we going to get symptoms in both legs or one leg? We're going to get it in one leg, only the leg that it's in. Okay, so the patient is not going to have bilateral redness, bilateral edema. They're only going to have it in one leg. Good. So sometimes the patient can be asymptomatic. They may not have this red line. It can be dull, aching pain, usually in the calf, somewhere in the leg, especially when you're walking, it hurts more. Possibly tender. It may not even be tender. Swelling, warm, erythema along the affected vein, like this picture. Cyanotic extremity. You may have a hard time getting, the extremity may not be getting well perfused. Cramping. Could feel like something's wrong with the leg. You can get cramping and you can get unilateral edema, only one leg, not both legs. If you have it in both legs, there's a chance it's something else, or you have two DVTs, one in each leg. How do we diagnose it? So if the provider suspects a patient has a DVT, the first test we usually do most often is we send them for a venous ultrasound. They go down for an ultrasound and they try to look for, right in here, they're going to try to look in here to see if there's a clot here. Okay, this provider is looking here and the vein, she's doing it up and down the vein, or where DVTs normally occur in the vein, even if they're asymptomatic, and they're going to try to see if they can find the clot. If they find the clot, bingo, done, diagnosed. Okay. If not, they can do an MRI, rarely done. The most common one is the ultrasound. Then they can also do contrast venography. They don't usually do that because then they have to inject the patient with dye, and that's invasive. Not everybody can handle the dye. And we don't know, some patients might be allergic to it. So we don't want to do that unless we have to. So that one's rarely done. It's the ultrasound. There are lab tests that we also can do. And the lab tests are a plasma D-dimer. It's called a D-dimer. We don't do it for children. And with this D-dimer, a D-dimer is a type of protein, and that is produced by the blood clot. So if the blood work comes back where the D-dimer plasma level is elevated, okay, that can be an indication for a clot. So it can indicate a clot in the legs, the lungs, a PE. It's also used for PEs too, because it just shows that there's that type of protein that is produced by the blood clot that they can suspect. So the D-dimer, if it's elevated, that can indicate a potential clot. Other lab tests not used to diagnose, but other lab tests are the PT-INR, the PTT, and the platelet count. We use those very, very frequently when we have a patient who has a clot. Is the protein fibrin? I'm not sure what the protein is. I just know that it's a type of protein. And you absolutely don't need to know that. Just know that a D-dimer is a test that we use to detect. It's a blood test. So one is the ultrasound, and the blood test that is used is the D-dimer. Okay, so how do we treat these? Anticoagulants, that is the treatment of choice. So I mentioned heparin. Heparin is the treatment for a light, small dose for prophylaxis. But once a clot has been diagnosed, we need to pull out the big guns and go to an anticoagulant. Okay, so an anticoagulant is used to prevent the blood clots from forming or growing larger. So your patient has a blood clot in their leg. We put them on an anticoagulant. It is not going to dissolve that existing clot. Okay, it's not going to dissolve it. What it's going to do is it's going to prevent it from getting bigger. Okay, that's what it's going to do. And it's going to prevent more blood clots from forming, hopefully, because sometimes you can get different blood clots. What it does is it inhibits the specific clotting factors in coagulation cascade. Basically, it's going to increase the normal clotting time. So if your blood takes so many seconds to clot, it's going to normally, if you're on an anticoagulant, it's going to take a little bit longer. Big, big, big side effect. Most of you know this because you've given heparin sub-Q, is bleeding. Okay, right there. Bleeding is huge with these patients, and we have to look out for that and watch it. Okay. Okay, so let's talk about the meds. Extremely important. Like I said, you need to know these medications. So usually the first thing we do is I say usually because sometimes we do a couple other things, but most often, if the patient is on the hospital, we put that patient immediately on a heparin drip, IV drip. Some of you, well, let me ask you, have any of you seen or had a patient who's been on an IV drip and you probably, a heparin drip? Yes, you probably don't know a whole lot about it, but you know that they're on a heparin drip because you're going to learn about heparin drips and how to calculate them because there's a lot of math involved. You're going to learn that next year at the senior level. I love heparin drips, by the way. I don't do anything with it, but you have to do it by weight. Exactly. It's totally weight-based, so you have to convert the pounds the patient weighs to kilograms. That's why it's so important to get an accurate weight on these patients. You convert it to kilograms, and then you give them so many milligrams per kilogram. Does that sound familiar? You guys have been doing this. But then you have to round, and you have to check the PTT every so often. Okay, and then you add the dose changes per the PTT results. Exactly. You do not have to know any of that. That's next year. Okay, you do have to know about heparin though. Okay, that it's an anticoagulant. Usually it's a patient is started on that immediately. Other anticoagulants, enoxaparin. Enoxaparin is Lovenox. That is given sub-Q. Sub-Q, only sub-Q. Enoxaparin is only sub-Q. Warfarin, Coumadin. Many of you have heard of Coumadin. Many of you may have relatives or know people who are on Coumadin. This is only PO. Okay, so the question might be, why don't we start someone on Coumadin? Okay, I'll tell you about that in a minute. Now we have these new anticoagulants. There are factor 10A inhibitors. Some of you have been giving them. I know some of my students yesterday gave these anticoagulants. Big common one is Eliquis. You see it all over TV, right? Right here. And also another one is Xarelto. These are the two most common. I would, depending on your provider, is going to depend on your plan of care. Does the provider want to put you on Eliquis, Xarelto? Some people prefer Xarelto because it's once a day. Eliquis is twice a day. Eliquis is a little bit newer. This one is the newest one. Savesa. And to tell you the truth, I have not seen any patients on it. Maybe you have, but I have not. So I remember when it came out because the company was competing with, we used to have Pradaxa. That was a very common one. Pradaxa had some side effects that I'm not sure if it's still on the market, but not many providers use it. They use Xarelto and Eliquis. So these are your new oral anticoagulants. So all of these are PO anticoagulants, okay? These are PO. Warfarin, PO only. PO only, okay? Heparin is IV only, okay? Lovenox is sub-Q only. So the question, I'm going to go back. The question is, how do we choose? How do we know what to choose? Okay, obviously we don't choose, it's the provider's choice, but we need to know why they're choosing what they're choosing. These new, remember I told you these new oral anticoagulants, I'm going to talk about them because there's some side effects to them. These new oral anticoagulants have been out recently. The patient may be NPO. Sometimes it depends on maybe they could take it, Heidi, with just a sip of water. But the reason is because years ago, we didn't have these, okay? We didn't have these right here, all right? We only had these. This is all we had to choose from. Okay, this is it. So if we would give a patient Coumadin, they would not be anticoagulated for days. I have had patients in the hospital for a week walking around with their IV pole because they would be taking Coumadin, but guess what? Coumadin, PO drug, does not bring you up to the therapeutic value immediately. It takes days. It depends on the patient. Some patients can become therapeutic in 2 or 3 days. Others will become therapeutic in 5 to 6 to 7 days. In the meantime, we got to do something about that DVT. We discover that DVT, we immediately put that patient on IV heparin because we can get them therapeutic pretty fast. Okay, yeah, immediately, pretty much immediately. We have to check the levels to make sure that it's not too high or too low where we need to increase the dose. We do the math, we start them out based on their weight. We start them out at a certain dose, and everybody's going to start at a different dose when you're on IV heparin. Once you're on that IV heparin, after that, we check it every 6 hours, and we want to see, are they still therapeutic? We have to keep drawing blood on them every 6 hours to see if they're therapeutic or not. Once they're in that therapeutic range, we check it once a day. You're going to learn about heparin drip next year. And calculations. I just want you to know that's the first thing we do is we put them on IV heparin. Then we can sometimes, once they're anticoagulated, they're therapeutic, I should say. Once they're therapeutic, then we're going to put them on something to go home. They can't go home on the IV. So depending on the patient, we might put them on Coumadin. Coumadin is phasing out. People do not like, doctors don't want to use Coumadin. There's a lot of reasons why. And we're going to talk about the pros and cons to these meds because you need to know them. Because you are going to get patients, if you have not already, who've been on Coumadin for years. And they're not going to change. They're happy on their Coumadin. Okay? They don't mind it. Has anybody given Coumadin? Anybody had any patients on Coumadin that they given Coumadin to? Yes. Yeah. They've been on it for years. It's worked for them. Coumadin is phasing out. Coumadin is cheap, very inexpensive. Guess what? Eliquis, my friend's husband recently went on Eliquis about 2 weeks ago, and she called me and she said, guess what? And they have insurance, $450 a month. Okay? And they have insurance. This is in Florida. I don't know if it's going to be the same. They're actually coming back. I'll let you know if it's going to be higher or not. But they're coming back from Florida tomorrow. And he had a DVT and a PE down in Florida, and the doctor put him on Eliquis, and she said, with their insurance, it's $450 a month. Coumadin, I don't know, $20 a month. Okay, so there's a big difference. Yeah, patients get a lot of bruising. They get a lot of bruising on any anticoagulant. I've had a patient on heparin and being discharged, they put her on Eliquis. Yes. So what they're doing today is they're starting them on the IV heparin. And then the IV heparin, I got so many lines here. From the IV heparin, they're now discharging them on these oral 10A inhibitors. That's what their factor 10A inhibitors, that's what they're discharging them on, Xarelto or Eliquis. Yes. They're bypassing the warfarin. So they're really waiting to see. Now, if a family is like, you know what, I can't afford the $450 a month, or it might be higher. That was just my friend's quote. So I don't know what exactly it is. They say case managers. So you want to ask the case manager, they say there's coupons. Possibly my friend did not qualify. I'm not sure. But the coupons are supposed to bring it down to like $100 a month. Still a lot. Warfarin, Coumadin, much, much, much cheaper. Patient's bleeding risk is a major consideration choosing appropriate therapy, as is the ability to reverse these agents should a patient need emergency surgery. Absolutely. Absolutely, Stephanie. Some anticoagulants have antagonists for reversals. Others don't. Yes. And I'm going to get into that right now. Excellent point. Okay. So yeah, there's many considerations. It's the provider's choice, but just know normally we start them on IV heparin and then they go to Eliquis or something. However, they will tell you, you can hear on TV, and the drug reps will tell you that you don't have to go on IV heparin. You can immediately start the patient right on Eliquis and send them home and not even do the IV heparin. Okay? So, but that is the provider's choice. Okay. So heparin, it's used in higher doses. right? So that's what we use as an anticoagulant versus the prophylaxis. The prophylaxis is just to prevent it. Once they have it, they need a higher dose of IV. So it's used to treat the condition, okay? It's used to treat the DVT or the PE. It's based on the patient's weight. So it binds to antithrombin 3. You do not have to know this, but for those of you who are interested, it inactivates several clotting factors. It inhibits the thrombin activity. So that's how it works with the clotting factors. It prolongs the clotting time. And a PTT. So there are blood tests called PTT and PT. Okay? PTT is specific to heparin. It is specific to heparin. So know that. The PTINR is specific to Coumadin. Heparin has an antagonist, as Stephanie was mentioning. This antagonist, if a patient starts to bleed and they start to bleed very, very badly, and we can't stop the bleeding, we can give protamine sulfate. That is the antagonist for heparin. The side effects to heparin and anticoagulants are abnormal bleeding. Heparin can give you something called heparin-induced thrombocytopenia. What happens with that is your platelets become extremely, extremely low. And then we have to give you, what's the medication? Agatroban, but you don't need to know about that. That's a whole nother protocol. If you start to have a reaction to the heparin, it can lower your platelets to a dangerously low level. That's why when we give heparin, it is important to check the patient's platelets. And Sarah, we gave heparin a couple weeks ago, and Sarah made a great catch, and she said the platelet count on my patient is 80. What should the platelet count be? Anybody know what platelets should normally be? Anybody know normal platelets? No? Okay, yeah, excellent. 150 to 400. Yes, excellent. That's exactly what it should be, Megan. 150 to 400. This patient's, 1,000? Yes, it's 1,000. So this patient's was 80. Okay, so we went to the nurse and we told the nurse, and the nurse told us, you know what, it's fine. They've been giving it all along. Okay, so I said to Sarah, so she told us to give it. And I said to Sarah, no, it is not fine. And the nurses, yes, they've been giving it all along because the nurses have not bothered to check what the platelet count is. So I called it to her attention. And when you look it up in the computer, you will see in the reference manual for heparin, it should not be given if the patient has a platelet count less than 100. So we called it to the nurse's attention. And so she called the provider, and guess what? We held the heparin. So the side effect to this is that it can lower your platelets to a dangerously low level. Doesn't happen all the time, but you don't want to be taking care of that patient and giving the heparin when it does. Yes, it was a great catch. And you don't want to be taking care of that patient when their platelets are dropping and you're continuing to give the heparin. Used in low doses subcutaneously to prevent a DVT. It's preferred anticoagulant in pregnant women. However, there are other anticoagulants for pregnant women. Most pregnant women go on enoxaparin, Lovenox. And those of you who have been pregnant in your time, some of you moms in the group, you may have been on enoxaparin during your pregnancy. Okay, but it is safe to give heparin. I'm sorry, but I have to go right now. Okay. We're going to continue this tomorrow. I'm going to continue for a couple more minutes. Tomorrow, I'm going to take questions. Okay. This is extremely important content because you are going to be using this when you go to clinical. Believe me, at OB, I gave my patient enoxaparin after her C-section. Excellent. Yes. Does IV heparin cause that, or does sub-Q do too? Both of them do. Heparin does. All heparin, any heparin, whatever dose, yes. So when you're given those heparin sub-Qs, Nicole, and everyone else, make sure, I'm not trying to pick on you, Nicole, but I know that you give a lot of medications, being an LPN, make sure that you are eyeballing that platelet. Yeah, count. Yeah. And I think a lot of the nurses don't know that. Yeah, you never knew that. We just give it, right? Doctor orders it, we give it. No, we need to make sure we have critical thinking skills. Okay, enoxaparin, low molecular weight heparin. It's a type of heparin. It's a little bit different. Is PTT the same as, yeah, PTT? Yeah, we basically call them PTT, but there's also PT. They're two different tests, okay? And they watch two different things. I'll get to that. It's a newer class of heparin, enoxaparin, used frequently, commonly in OB, pregnant woman, very, very commonly used. It's a shorter heparin molecule, so the chemical molecule is shorter. You don't have to know that, but you do have to know that it's used more commonly with certain patients. There are no dietary restrictions. Patient can eat whatever they want. It's not going to affect their blood. No INR monitoring. So you're going to learn that there's a blood test called a PT-INR. And that INR is your it stands for, and you don't even have to know this, but I don't even think most people, actually, I have to almost like look it up because we just call it INR, but it stands for International Normalized Ratio. That is an INR. And that is where patients will monitor how their clotting time, I should say. Like, is your blood going to take longer to clot or not? We should probably continue this tomorrow, I'm thinking. Let me just finish this slide and I will resume on this slide tomorrow. So subcutaneous injection is how it's given. It's not PO, it's injection. I'm sure some of you have probably given Lovenox in clinical. It's for prevention of DVT after surgery. A lot of orthopedic patients use Lovenox. It has a lower risk for bleeding and thrombocytopenia. Okay, so, bleeding, I talk about bleeding precautions. Bleeding is a problem. If you're bleeding in your urine or your stool, that's a problem. If you're bleeding in your brain, is that a problem? Is that a big problem?
Yes.
That is a huge problem. So we always want to figure out where the patient is bleeding from. Okay. Are they bleeding from their stool? Do they have, blood in their stool, blood in their urine? Then we need to always let the provider know. Are they bleeding in their mouth? Okay. But if they're bleeding in their brain, that is huge. And then we have to consider stopping it. So it really, what is low molecular weight heparins? So really need to know about, watching these patients closely for a bleed. And then if they do bleed and it's in the brain, we want to think about a reversal agent. Can we reverse it? Can we not reverse it? Is there a reversal agent? Do we have time to wait? Low molecular weight, it's a shorter molecule on the chemical chain chemistry. So it's the same, but it's just shorter. Okay, bleeding is serious. There's serious side effects to these. There's serious side effects to any of the anticoagulants. Just know that. Okay, with that said, I think we're going to stop. Does everybody want me to stop? It's almost, I can keep going for another minute or two, but I think, let me just do this slide with one more minute, and then we're going to start off on these two slides, and I'll take questions tomorrow so that you can figure this out. And then I have one homework assignment for you before tomorrow's class. Oral medication is used to treat DVT. This is your warfarin and PE. It inhibits the action of vitamin K. Okay, vitamin K is involved in this. That's how it works, which is required for liver to make those clotting factors. The antagonist is vitamin K. So if a patient comes in, they're bleeding, they're on warfarin, we can give them vitamin K. It takes a little bit of time, about 6 hours, but it will work, and we can reverse the effects of the Coumadin, and they can now clot faster. It takes several days to achieve this therapeutic level. That's what I was talking about. We start the patients on IV heparin. We give them Coumadin at the same time. We want to bridge the two together so that by the time the patient is therapeutic with Coumadin, they need their blood value. This is extremely important to be between 2 and 3, their PT-INR. This only applies to patients who are on warfarin. Only applies to patients who are on warfarin. This does not apply to patients who are on Eliquis, Xarelto, or any of those meds. Okay? Only applies to patients who are on Coumadin or warfarin. I say both of them, it's the same drug. So this is your PT that we watch, not PTT. This is your prothrombin time. PT stands for prothrombin time. Okay? The other one is your partial thromboplastin time. That's your PTT. Don't worry about that. So there's PTT, that's for heparin. PT-INR is for Coumadin only. It's given together with heparin because it takes time to become therapeutic. That's called the bridging. We're bridging them over. Your patients might ask you, my father's getting Coumadin and heparin. Why are they getting the two at the same time? It takes time for them to become therapeutic, to have an INR between 2.3, roughly 2.5. There are many dietary restrictions, okay? Frequent blood work to check that INR. Like you're going every couple days because you don't want that INR to be 5. If the higher the INR, the thinner your blood. Okay, so you might see an INR. A patient might come in the emergency room with a bleed and they look at their INR and it's like 8. Okay, 8 is like out of control high. 5 is way too high. Okay, 6. And I mean, I have seen INRs as high as 11. Huge, bad. Okay, you've seen some really high ones too, Sarah. Yeah. Okay, so that means they're not getting their PT-INR blood drawn. You have to go frequently in the beginning, like almost every day in the beginning, every other day. Go get it checked. Go get another blood draw. Make sure it's okay. And then the doctor's going to increase it or decrease it because they want you on exactly 5 milligrams. Some patients are on 5 milligrams one day, 7.5 every other day. So, you have to get it right so that the PT-INR is your INR, I should say. Your INR is between 2 to 3. This is the INR. You look for the PT-INR, but it's the INR that is 2 to 3. And certain foods will cause it to go down. Okay, your dark green leafy vegetables will cause it to go down. So does that mean you don't eat it? No, you eat those dark green leafy vegetables because they're good for you. You just have to have a consistent diet. Okay, right. It has to be consistent. One last thing, it is contraindicated in pregnant women. We do not want our pregnant woman on warfarin. What should pregnant women be on? What's safe? Heparin and Lovenox. Excellent, excellent. Okay, I want to give you your little homework assignment. It's at the end. It's at the end. Oh, goodness, we've got a little bit to do. Okay, so what I want you to do for tomorrow's class is to, we're not going to divide you in groups, is to come up with a teaching plan if a patient's on Coumadin, a teaching plan for a patient that is on Xarelto, one who's using non-pharmacological therapy to treat a DVT. What are we going to do for them? And how to prevent a DVT. Okay? So I want you to answer those 4 questions. Come up with a little bit of patient education because it's huge for these patients, especially when they've been newly diagnosed. They need to know, what can I eat? Is it going to affect it? Is it not? Okay? All right. See everyone tomorrow, 9:30. Thank you.
Professor Mobilio, I have a question.
Sure.
So if you have a question, I guess, which one would you choose for a pregnant woman? Would you choose heparin over Lovenox?
Depends on the patient. Lovenox can be given in outpatient therapy. Heparin, for the most part, has to be given IV. So if the patient is in the hospital, they might get started on IV heparin. When they go home, they're going to get the Lovenox. Both drugs are acceptable.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome. What would be a dietary restriction for a patient on Coumadin? It's not so much dietary restrictions or any dark green leafy vegetables. It's not that they're restricted. It's that you have to eat it consistently. If you eat a huge salad and spinach one day, and then tomorrow you eat nothing, and then you don't eat it again for another week or two, then you eat a whole lot, it's going to throw off your INR. So you need to be consistent and eat a little bit every day or a lot every day, whatever you normally eat. You just need to be consistent. Sure. Okay. What about garlic? Yeah, no, all that's good. Megan, some people feel that garlic, jingo, and all that can cause your INR to be increased. So it's not necessary. So the bottom line for all of this is to just eat a consistent diet. You want to be, if you normally eat garlic all the time, you want to keep eating. You don't want to like suddenly change in 1 week habit where you're eating garlic and then, because it can affect it. It definitely can affect it, but the key is to be consistent. Okay, it's not the same as vitamin K. Vitamin K is going to help your blood clot a little bit more, and it's going to lower your INR. Garlic and other things, natural products, can cause your INR to increase. Okay, it's almost works like an anticoagulant. That's why it's so good for you. It works like an anticoagulant. It helps your blood from clotting. But so are the dark green leafy vegetables. I shouldn't say that. They just have vitamin K in them. So, dark green leafy vegetables have vitamin K. So you have to watch you don't get too much, because that is your, I'm trying to think of the word. It just skipped my mind. I lost the word. I'll tell you the word in a second. That is your antagonist. Antagonist is vitamin K for Coumadin.
So I know the heparin has to be done by weight, right? So obviously if a patient is on like a long-term anticoag like the Coumadin and such like that, and they want to start eating healthy and changing their lifestyle, that's something that they'd have to bring up to their provider, or will they just have to increase their INR?
Absolutely. No. Absolutely bring it up to your provider. You have to go every so often to get blood work drawn, because, some people don't bring it up to their provider, and then it's dangerous. So yeah, absolutely bring it up to your provider to make sure that this is something that is not affecting your new diet. Like all of a sudden you want to start getting healthy. You want to tell your doctor, because it can change the amount of Coumadin that you're on. That's why people prefer to be on Xarelto. Okay. A lot of people I don't want to have to worry about what I'm eating and when I'm eating it. I just want to go on Xarelto or Eliquis.
Professor, so I had a patient that he was on Coumadin and he was trying to lose weight. So he was eating a lot of fish and a lot of green vegetables, and it ended up actually throwing off his PTINR values. So his provider just told him to that he needs to reduce on the greens and the fish. Now I know with vitamin K.
Okay, don't tell me who that provider is, because that is, someone's eating healthy. No, what he needs to do is adjust the Coumadin accordingly. And the patient may need to go for more frequent blood tests. You don't want to tell somebody to reduce their greens.
Yeah, so he ended up saying he was going to reduce, and he thought he was doing great. So that's why I'm curious to how I would answer.
Yeah, well, all providers are a little bit different. However, if someone's trying to eat healthy, you want to just adjust the med. He may have to go for more frequent blood work to check that INR to make sure he is in range.
Okay.
Okay.
So pretty much it's just being consistent, like you said earlier.
It's like what?
Pretty much just continue to be consistent with his.
It's about consistency. Yes. It's about eating a consistent diet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
I
All
have
right,
one
sure.
more question regarding the clinical like manifestations. I was curious because usually, well, I can't say usually, but if it's asymptomatic, but I've had patients that have like the clinical presentation of like that redness and that tenderness when they have a DVT on the leg. And I was just curious, as it moves up, like if it becomes like an emboli, right? And as it moves up, will you start to see some of that redness go down or not really because the blood flow is still going to be obstructed a little bit or maybe to
Um,
the side?
you know, I don't know. That's an individual case because you don't always even see the redness as it's moving up, you know. If they start out with it, it could move up. It depends on what that clot is doing. It depends on so many things. There's so many conditions. Depends on what that leg looked like prior, what the personal individual vein looks like, what comorbidities they have as it's starting to. Usually, it goes very, very quickly. You start to have other symptoms if it starts to move. Usually.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, everyone. Thank you. And I will see you all tomorrow. Same place, same time.